Hey, Lexi here. It's no secret that I'm a big fan of fantasy. Whether or not I believe it's real, I do manage to find a little bit of fantasy in everyday life sometimes. The day I interviewed for my job at the center was one of those times. I'm in no way saying I'm psychic. Then again, my friend Sandra likes to say that I am, as a sort of inside joke, so who knows really. Either way, it seemed like I was getting a lot of signs that day. I'm not sure I believe in psychics, but I can be a pretty superstitious person. So when it looks like I'm getting a lot of warnings about one specific thing, I'm not going to let that go unnoticed. But I don't usually do a lot about it in case it's mostly in my head. On the day of my interview at the center, I had so many signs about this job. Everything from the universe was trying to keep me from getting to the interview. Signs that I will very likely get the job, and then signs that this job was not going to go well. I left my house very early to get to the interview. In fact, for some reason, I left over an hour earlier than I probably even needed to. Want to know what happened to that hour? Google Maps sent me in a completely wrong direction on the way to this new bus stop that I didn't know how to find. I somehow ended up walking probably half a mile or more, walking along a very busy multi-lane road with no sidewalk. And it was hot. I felt like I was going on a hike in my interview clothes. Also, if I kept going that direction, I probably would have ended up on a highway on foot. I ended up walking all the way back in the direction I came from, only to have Google Maps tell me to go back where I was going before. I couldn't understand what was happening. It knew I was on foot, not in a car. I ended up taking a local bus to get to the city bus stop, just before the city bus showed up, that I barely managed to catch. Like the universe was trying very hard for me to miss this bus. Any later, and I would have missed it completely, and missed the interview, despite my being over an hour early for being early. The interview itself had some weird things going on, but I'd talk about that all in my last center video. After the interview though, I had promised myself a trip to the bookstore, and gosh darn it, that was what I was going to do. Unlike getting to the interview that morning, getting to the bookstore from that was shockingly easy, even though it was nowhere near there. I could see the bookstore, and I was really excited to be just by myself, in the quiet, and see if I could explore the sales section outside since it was nice out. But before I made it all the way there, a wild psychic appeared. You think I'm kidding, I bet, but that's really how it felt. Walking up the block, about to cross the street to the bookstore, was when I saw a woman out of the corner of my eye on a sidewalk to my right. I didn't look straight at her, but she did look distinctly like someone who would work as a professional psychic. She had on a dress with stars and moons. She had a very dramatic headscarf with a similar design. Large gold circular earrings. She looked like she belonged on a TV show. She was heading in the opposite direction when she stopped in her tracks all of a sudden. Her head turned toward me. I still didn't make eye contact with her, or even stop walking. Bookstore, bookstore, bookstore. The psychic crosses the street at a run towards my side of the road. I find myself really wishing she was just going to ask me for directions. Something I never thought I'd wish for. But between how suddenly she came up to me, and how she didn't seem lost before she noticed me, it really didn't look like she was going to ask me for directions. She said, "Excuse me, I'm sorry, but I really need to tell you something." She sounded alarmingly concerned. First thing that flashed through my head was how I didn't want bad news. Second thought was, I'm unemployed. I can't pay her for a prediction even if I wanted one. I nervously tell her, "Oh, okay, no thank you," in a hurry, then walk quickly the rest of the way up the block, across the street, to the bookstore so fast like I thought I could run away from my fate. I could hear her behind me start the sentence, "But I really need to tell you," and trail off. I felt so guilty about it, but I tried to pretend it never happened. My mind, though, didn't want to leave well enough alone. I watched too many fantasy movies to ignore a psychic needing to tell me something directly after an interview. The law of plotting says I'm going to get that job, and I'm going to find out that I don't want this job. I'm not sure if it'll last even 6 months. I predicted it myself right then and there. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't usually get thoughts like that. I rarely think I'll get a job after an interview, if ever. But right then and there, I felt so sure about it, and it was the opposite of confidence. On paper, I didn't think I was a very good fit for this job based on how Ruby called my main skill a hobby. That was by no means an ego trip. This was, oh no, this is the start of something bad. Looking at my location later on, it turns out the bookstore I went to wasn't far from a fortune-telling business. So it's very likely this woman worked there, was just on lunch break, based on the time. As it turns out, I did get the job, obviously. And I found out, completely by coincidence, on the same block as the center, was a tiny little psychic storefront tucked away next to a grocery store. Again, this was nowhere near the bookstore. I know logically it didn't mean anything. But as someone who's never gone to see a psychic, and as someone who rarely ever runs into places like that, it was eerie. In fact, months later, a coworker of mine had a kind of obsession with talking about the place. How we should go there together one day, but also she didn't want to, because she was afraid of it. Afraid it would lock her fate one way or the other. Either way, I didn't want to go. She would bring it up all the time though. Again, I'm not saying I believe in psychics, but I know how superstitious I am. And when I remember something like this, and it turns out to be true, it's a little spooky. Am I reading too much into this? Probably, very likely. But I like reading. So those are all the signs and warnings I had that day about the center. About 2 weeks later, I got the call that I got the job. At the time, I was very excited until I got off the phone and had a pit in my stomach. I wasn't even thinking about the signs. I just suddenly felt worried I'd regret this. At least after everything that happened, I have a lot of stories about it to share with you guys. I like to tell people I'm taking not so great experiences and turning it into a horror comedy cartoon content, because so much of it was so ridiculous, it should have been animated. Next time at the center, I'll actually tell you how the job started. This was my last preamble, I promise. Give this video a like if you're excited to hear more about the center. Subscribe and ring the bell so you know every time that I post. That's right, I have a bell. I didn't just buy for this, I actually had a bell. Finally, I have a use for it. Bye guys. Can you hear this at all? Or is it too quiet? I don't even know. I'm annoying. Okay, bye guys.